off. So
Is he running?
mhm.
That's awesome.
Lana, is he thinking about Clemson?
He is. My oldest just graduated from Clemson in August, and so it's high on his list, but he's not completely sold on it yet.
My husband went there. We lived in Central, which is just the next town over, for about 8 years. It's a cool place.
Yeah, my oldest loved it. But now he's having to pay for it, so it's not that great anymore.
So
Are you talking?
Lana and I used to work in the same district, and I taught her kids. I've taught her kids through different things, so it's always good to see her.
Yes.
I'm sorry ahead of time for anything they did.
I love your kids. You stop.
So y'all are talking about Clemson.
Yes.
Well, I tell people I did not go to school at Clemson, but I did, however, get my doctorate at Chapel Hill via the Clemson method. I drove through town with my window rolled down and just threw my diploma in. So that's my Clemson joke for today. So thank everybody for joining us tonight. Dr. Sane's glad to have you with us. I am so excited for next week. Dr. Sane will be leading us again next week on our Exceptional Children's module next week, and that'll be a treat, I'm telling you. He knows so much about that, and it is so relevant today. If you're keeping up with the news, the paralegal that was working in a school, was that in Florida? I want to say that was assaulted by the exceptional children, and all these people all over the country are screaming and yelling about why they hadn't done this and why they hadn't done that. And I'm just, you just got to understand, exceptional children's law, you just can't do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. And that's my biggest caution, I guess, for folks in the school business now is that you're going to have exceptional children wherever you go. They're not always going to be in public separates. And so you better know how you can deal with them, because as we're going to find out in our last case study, the folks, used to be that EC parents came and screamed and yelled all the time. And now not only do they come and scream and yell about the rights of their kids, the regular ed parents come and scream and yell all the time. And so now you have two opposing forces, unfortunately, and it puts a lot of pressure on school administration. And Dr. Sane's going to talk extensively about what you can and can't do with EC children next week. So that's going to be a great one. Looking at our schedule, the week after that is spring break. They do have a schedule for spring break Monday through Friday. I would caution you, though, don't take a break from your evidence work. Keep up with that. Now, I want to talk about evidence work for 30 seconds. Last semester, that's pretty much all you did. We're doing a lot more than that. Now, I'm not saying that to say that evidence work's not important, but remember when I told you the first night of this class, we could all do better if we had more time. That part of what we're trying to do is I'm shifting some of the responsibility to you, but it's about time management. I can't send back at if your work I adjudicated to be a 3, we're moving on, because you've got all of these case studies to do, all this collaboration, all these weekly activities and assignments. Your evidence work is still important, but we can't focus on it where it goes through 4 or 5 revisions like we did last semester. If it's 3, that's great. Nobody's ever going to know that you made less than a 4 on any of these evidences. And it would be irresponsible of me to send it back 4 or 5 times in order to try to get that 4 every time, and then you get behind on your work and I have to give you an incomplete. Remember, we're already ramped up for summer. Remembering we've got to get the OMA and the skip knocked out this semester and get started on the cap. Otherwise, you won't finish this summer. And I suspect you'd be rather angry at me, because here's the bad news of not finishing on time. It used to be that it wasn't that much of a penalty other than time, but unfortunately, Gardner Webb has made the decision that if you have to come back and spend an extra semester with us to finish up your portfolio, they're going to charge you $2,000 to do that. Not only are they going to charge you a semester of time, they're going to charge you $2,000. You know, I don't agree with that, but I'm not the one pulling the trigger on that. So $6.99, the internship extension is now 3 credit hours plus fees. It's just a few dollars over $2,000. So that's what we're talking about. Not only will you not get your license at the end of summer so that you can go into a job in the fall or keep the job that you have, you'd have to come back with us in the fall and write a Gardner Webb a check for about $2,100. So that's we're playing for keeps here. We got to keep the train rolling. So if you're getting 3s, 3 5s, 3 2, 3 7 5s, 4s, I'm tickled pink. Let's just keep the train rolling. That doesn't mean that your work's not great. It just means that we're managing our time effectively and understanding that that's what you have to do as school administrators. We could all do better on every phase of our life if we had more time, but we have to make some executive decisions, some leadership decisions. So that's enough about that. Let's talk about the skip before we get to our case study tonight. I'm going to post, and I should have already done it, but I was afraid to. I was afraid somebody'd see it, and then you know, then I'd have to answer a million questions. I'm going to put last week's video from my other class where I covered the skip. It's a 13-minute stretch, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time tonight, but I do want to go over the skip with you. Once you get task 1 of the skip knocked out, the others are extremely simple and don't take hardly any time at all. So let's talk about the CAP. Let me share my screen again. Welcome everybody. Appreciate y'all being here. Oh, I've got it already preloaded here. Let me pull it up. Here we go. All right. So this is the stakeholder community involvement plan. What we're trying to do is determine the gaps in communication between the school and parents or stakeholders. See if we can close those gaps using technology and then utilize that new communication to run some academic events at our school to help with our academic achievement. Now, we're not looking for gaps in academic achievement. You've already done that. You did that last semester. We're only looking for gaps in communication. So make sure that you understand when you're doing your needs assessment for gap, it says it right here, gaps in communication between internal and external. That's you and your parents, the school and the parents. Now, where do you go to find that? Teacher Working Condition Survey. They have a parent involvement section right there in South Carolina on the survey down there. That's all you have to do. You don't need to send anybody a survey. You don't do anything. You simply look at your teacher working condition survey and boom, right there it is. Now, if you don't know where that is, I'm going to, and I could have pulled it up already, but I didn't. I want you to watch me do this. Have watched me in the past. It's really simple. It's Google. It's you can find it from the state report card in South Carolina. You know how to do that in South Carolina, people. You know how to find your survey. NC Teacher Working Conditions Survey 2022. We're straight to the survey results. We'll do one of, don't sit and grind on me. Move that out of the way. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to do one that's that way. Get one that's quick here. All right, so we're looking for facilities and resources. We're going to use time, facilities, and here we go. Community support and involvement right here. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do is find this one, community support and involvement. That's it. And then, you know, parents, guardians, or influential decision makers in this school. The school maintains clear two-way communications. The needs assessment's already done for you. It's right here. Encouraging parent and government involvement. So you simply, this is your needs assessment. You write up what you find. That's it. That's all you need to do to get started on this thing. So let's go back to our task and prompts, background description, setting. You've already written that. You wrote it in your OMA earlier this semester. Just pull the same one, copy and paste. Second, clear statement of purpose. All you gotta say is we're looking for gaps in communication. Done. Move on. List of participants, whoever's on your team that you're with you. Analysis of your finding. You present the parent and community involvement data from your TWC. Boom. Move on. You just copy and paste. Set of recommendations. All right. Here we go. Recommendation that identifies avenues of communication that will be established. This is like, we're going to use TikTok, we're going to use Twitter, we're going to use Facebook, we're going to use social media, we're going to use Instagram, we're going to use, these are the things, we're going to use this system, that system. What are we going to do? And then a set of recommendations that includes both short and long-term objectives. Now, be clear on this. This is really simple. Your short term is what are we going to do to communicate? Again, that's that same TikTok, Instagram. This is what we're going to do on short term. And then long term is these are the events that we're going to have now that we've grabbed and we've hooked these parents. This is what we're going to do. Basically, help us help you help your child. Let me say that again. Help us help you help your child. Get these parents in. Family math night, family reading night, family EOG, family EOC. You know, all these meetings. We have this mistaken, stop my share for a second here. We have this mistaken notion that if we get parents in our building, that'll make our test scores go up. It won't. Newsflash, it won't. If we get them in for the right reasons, it can. But if they just come to watch the talent show or the ball game, that won't make your test scores go up. In the decade of the 2000s, Independence High School in Charlotte won they win 10 or 11 state titles there in a row with the 4AA, the highest level of football in North Carolina. It was a big deal. I was in the central office. I went to the central office in August of 2010. No, August of 2000, excuse me. How old am I? August of 2000, I went to the central office after a long and mostly mediocre career as a school administrator at the building level. I went to the central office in August of 2000. And boy, was I in for a rude awakening in terms of what I was going to have to do in terms of dealing with the crowds that we had at Independence High School. If you don't know, Independence High School is on the east side of Charlotte. It's in the little municipality of Mint Hill. There are probably 8,000 or 10,000 people that live in Mint Hill. On ball game night at Independence High School, we had 40,000 people show up for ball games there. 40,000. Do you think their test scores went up? No. They were dumb as a cake of soap. They couldn't spell cat. You spotted them to see. They were terrible. Love the people who were there. Love that community, but boy, they were awful academic. Just awful. I had to deal with that too. They were just terrible. But now they had parents. Every parent in the school came. Everybody from far and wide came, but it did not help their test scores. It's what you do with those parents once you get it. Family math night, family reading night. When we get to our fourth case study, it's a textbook example of we should have these parents in and tell them about the inclusion model for exceptional children's service. In our fourth case study, we got a group of parents who the basic ed, the regular ed parents are coming in and screaming and yelling, this inclusion model is not good for my regular ed kids. They're being used to teach the EC kids, and my kids are losing ground academically. This would have been a perfect opportunity to have a family night where you had people in and explain the inclusion model to them. And it would be a perfect, to do math manipulatives in elementary school and, and have to partner with Scholastic and do a book fair kind of thing and get parents in and get more reading materials into their hands. That's what we're talking about. That's our ultimate goal here. Short term is what communication methods are we going to use? Long term is simply, now that we've got them, what are we going to do with them? Other than them sit in the stands in the gym and watch a ball game, or in the seats of the auditorium and watch a talent show. Those won't help your test scores. But there are things that you can do that will help your test scores. The second part, prompt 2 of task 1 is real simple. It says, look at the same teacher working condition survey. Let me go back to where I was. And instead of looking at that one, look at your school leadership. Look at not teacher leadership, but look at school leadership. Show me school leadership. There we go. Look at that one. Is there an area in that we could improve on to help in this area? So let's go back and read that prompt again. Lead a team to conduct an organizational analysis to determine the climate of the school. North Carolina Teaching District Service may use appropriately. The candidate should evaluate school leadership and use the evaluation as validation or climate survey. Now, it doesn't have to be about you do it all. It doesn't have to be about communication. You just address the strengths and weaknesses of school leadership, period. And if you have any recommendations that would also go in your action plan or marketing plan, we'll include those as well. So we're trying to improve parent communication, get them here to have some long-term events. Now, don't do like short-term. We're going to do, a foam tree. I'll use that. I know that's old and outdated. Long-term, we're going to maintain it. No, that's just more short-term. Short-term is a communication technique using social media, technology. Long-term is an actual event at your school that parents would attend in person, where you do academic content with them. Then prompt 2 is we look at school leadership. Is there something that's glaring there that would help as well to improve the culture of our school? And then in task 2, you simply identify your fiscal and human resources that it's going to take to run your plan. 3, you write your plan. Same as the same action plan that you did in the first 2. And then 4, you write your competencies. Now, to help you with your task 2 and 3, I have this under skip task. So for task 3, you'll do the full action plan, but again, it's called marketing plan. And in task 2, you just do the first half of it and identify the resources it's going to take to do the activities. I mean, what's it going to take to do family math night? What's it going to take to do family reading night? Those kinds of things. This one is quick, it's easy, it's simple. Again, I will put this video and the video from last week where I spent, I think, 13 minutes. I've been about that many tonight. But so you can look at either one of them and say, okay, I know what there is to do. It's a really, really simple. As long as you know exactly where to go and what to get. And I've already done that for you. I've not made you sit and scratch your head or other parts you've already figured that out. I've told you exactly where to go. So it should be easy peasy. No, there is not a template. Told you got to make your own. Just make it the same way. It should look just like the one we had for the OMA. How many actions should you recommend? I don't know, usually about 1. At least 1 for communication and at least 1, no more than 2 on either. This is, again, as I reminded the group last night, and we're going to talk about this later, the whole point of what you've been doing through the MELS program or the MSA program through the MELS courses is you're learning how to build a school improvement plan. When we get to the CAP, you got 5 areas that you've got to analyze from TWC. And the biggest mistake students have is they analyze those 5 in task 1, and then they forget about them and jump on to other things. It is true that you have to add managing student conduct to your actual real action plan if you exceed the district or the state number of out-of-school suspensions or acts of crime and violence. You've got to write an additional safe school section to your action plan. But what we're trying to do is action plans. But here's the key. If you don't hear anything else I tell you tonight, hear this one. Is there one like this for Georgia? Yes, there is. They have the same thing. So hear this part. The rule is really simple, and this is statewide, North and South Carolina and Georgia. This is nationwide now. You can't put anything in a school action plan that you don't have resources on hand to fund. That's the biggest mistake principals make. So that's why I said don't have but about 2 things, because you got to fund. If you can't identify the resources in hand, if your plan is dependent upon, we're hoping to get this grant. That ain't a plan. That's hope, and it will come straight out of your school improvement plan. Boom, gone. Now you've got to have only the things that you've got resources in hand. That's all you could. That's all that you can put in a real school improvement plan. That's it. If you don't have the resources, you don't have the people, you don't have the money, it does not go. Now I'm going to tell you this as well. I'm only this nice grandfatherly man. I only play one on TV. In real life, I am not the nice grandfatherly man. I can tell you right now, I'm not being boastful. I used to see people physically run when I showed up from the central office. I am that guy. I am the one that takes all your blood when they come. Somebody has to do that, especially in larger districts. Somebody has to be everybody, and somebody has to be the asshole. That would be me. That comes out. Now I'm going to tell you right now, if you sent me your school improvement plan and I'd send it back one time, but now after that the problem's not yours, the problem's mine. Why am I keeping you? So I'm gonna go biblical on you. In the Bible it says you need to go to church on Sunday, but now if you have an emergency, if your ox is in the ditch, you can get your ox out of the ditch this Sunday. But if your ox is in the ditch every Sunday, you need a new ox. And so the vernacular in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, unfortunately, for that, it became new ox. It's time for a new ox. That means the problem is not yours. The problem is mine. Why am I keeping you in that role if you continue to send me work that I have to send back to you? And one of the biggest offenders is people putting stuff in their school improvement plan that we knew was never going to happen. They didn't have the time or the money or the resources to pull it off. We're now that's become law across the board. You can't send that stuff in. So don't add things to your action plan for school and move that's going to take $1 million to pull off. I mean, be realistic in this one more, because when you start talking about trying to feed people and pull off big community events like this, you just think you've seen money spent before. Now, the best one of these I ever saw was at Northwest Guilford. Keisha Sinclair and Diana Birdsey, and I had 6 interns there at one time, and they banded together and they did a college fair. And it cost a fortune, but they partnered with Novant, the healthcare people. And so what they had is all these desks set up with here's this healthcare job that you can get in the Greensboro area. Pays this much money, pays $80,000. All right. What college degree do you need to get that? So that's what they tracked. And okay, you need this degree from this university. What courses should you be taking in high school to prepare you to go to that university and take those classes? Within 2 years, and Ralph would have to admit this. Ralph Kitley's friend of mine, was principal at the time. They had the largest percentage of students taking advanced placement courses of any high school in North Carolina within 2 years. So here's the deal. They didn't bring, they brought seniors in, but earlier in the week when they had this thing set up at night, they brought in freshmen and their parents. Help us help you help your child. They brought these freshmen in, these freshmen with these freshman parents. Now, back in the day, it's a little bit different now, but back in the day when we ran this, you couldn't start advanced placement courses till the 10th grade. So they brought all the 9th graders in the spring before they did their course selections, and said to parents, you want your child to have this kind of job? Making this kind of money, you want this future for your child? All right, here's the path. These are the courses they got to start taking in the 10th grade. Wow, it exploded. Northwest Guilford, it exploded. Had one at Parkland and Winston-Salem, where they were working with the EL population, exploded. Test scores went through the roof. This is real. These things happen. They're legendary. I still get notes and cards from those people after all these years later. I saw Lisa Boer the other day. She was at Parkland, her and Jonathan, Dr. Wendy. I'm telling you, you can change the trajectory of a school and community with this. If you can hit upon it. But again, it's going to take big money. You might need a partner or something like that. But there's opportunities out there, folks. Sarah says they're doing that with your CTE. You doggone right. That's what we're talking about. But see, the problem, folks, here's the crux of the whole thing here. We can have the best events in the world, but what if parents aren't hooked in? What if they're not following the school? What if the school isn't communicating with them? They can't come if they don't know. That's the whole point. We're out trying to hook these parents and pull them in. It doesn't do any good to hook them. It doesn't do any good to have the events if they don't know. On the other hand, it doesn't do any good to hook them if we don't then use that as a force multiplier to have some events. Now that we got them, let's get them in and have some events, that will help us long term. Yeah, Jackie said Eli Lilly's moving in. Was it Philip Morris is moving out and Eli Lilly's moving in? That's, trading cigarettes, cigarettes for drugs. I don't know, but that seems like a net win to me. But yeah, new people coming in wanting to be a part of the community, do some PR. There you go. That's where you can conform. So that's why it's stakeholders. It's not just parents. We might want to involve some stakeholders for the point of send us a little money to do these kinds of things. But this is one of those things that can be a force multiplier in your school. Dr. Sane, I'll give you the last word on force multipliers and involving your school community this way.
Well, you've covered all of that one, Dr. Lamb. I don't really have anything specific to say. I do want to go back to the point about when you were talking about school improvement plans and putting things in there that you don't have the resources for at the school. I just want to drill back home that point that even though it sounds good, you can't put it in there if you don't have the resources. And everyone does that or tries to do that without thinking through it. So again, just remember, if you don't have the resources, don't put it in your school improvement plan.
Doggone right. That used to drive me crazy. If I had hair, it would have fallen out. I think that's why it fell out and left me over people doing that. All right, tonight is our case study night. I'm looking at my notes here, so we'll do in reverse order than we did last week. So Sandra, Sarah, Jackie, and Robin's group went last time. So kick us off tonight with Leandro. While they're getting ready, I want to remind you that this case was from 1993 and was decided in 1997. It is a watershed case for the United States. It's about how states fund public schools. Please remember that public schools are not they're not provided for are not part of the Constitution. They are in the preamble to the Constitution that states may provide public education. And so you don't get the 14th Amendment protections. The North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that the money only has to be equal in the start and only enough for a basic ed. Now, West Ed has since that time said that you've been $2 billion short on providing even for a basic education. Now, remember, basic education, if you read it, has nothing to do with getting kids ready to go to college. It's vocational track and general ed. That's all, back like when I went to school 1,000 years ago. You were lucky if you went to a high school that had a college prep track. In the county where I went to high school, there was 3 high schools. The county seat high school had plenty of college prep. The other 2, the high school I went to had 1 track. The other one didn't even have a track. It was vocational general ed. That's all the state says that you get in terms of a basic education. They don't care about disparities in wealth, that your local district can't add any more money for the education of a child. They don't care about that. Understanding that local districts are strapped because they have to pay for buildings now since 1966. And so capital needs are why low wealth districts are saying, we don't have much of a tax base. We don't have business. We take all of our money that the county commissioners give us to keep our buildings open. We can't add to the per pupil to actually educate a child, like say Charlotte Mecklenburg can. And so Leandro said, sorry, not only are we not going to make it equal in the end, give you more, you're not allowed to move your money around to address these deficiencies either. So that brings us to the superintendent's plan. All right, group 4, hit it.
Okay, sorry, Sandra's, my share is not working, so Sandra's going to share the presentation.
Excellent.
Okay. All right, here we go.
All right, so this is Jackie, me, Robin, Sandra, and Sarah presenting case study number 2. Whoops. I'm trying to click on it and it doesn't click.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just tell me when.
All right, go ahead. All right, so as Dr. Lamb was saying, this is we read the Leandro versus state of North Carolina. So it's a 1994 lawsuit against the state, arguing basically that lower wealth school districts did not have enough tax revenue to provide an equal education for their students. But the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that while neither school districts nor counties have a constitutional right to equal funding, every child in North Carolina has a constitutional right to a sound basic education. So it doesn't have to be equal, but everyone has to have a basic education.
Okay, so from that, us saying that everyone has to have a basic education, our next slide is, what is a sound-based education? It is sufficient ability to read, write, and speak the English language, and a sufficient knowledge of math and physical science, sufficient fundamental knowledge of geography, history, and basic economic and political systems, sufficient academic and vocational skills to engage in post-secondary education or vocational training. And lastly, sufficient academic and vocational skills to compete on an equal basis with others in further education or gainful employment. And we also have a letter to the community from the superintendent. Our synopsis is, the district has piloted at SBB at 4 schools and is now rolling it out to all schools. The superintendent is sending a letter to all parents, letting them know that the students will be weighted based on their needs to allocate funds to each school. Principals will reach out to the school communities to become engaged in this process of determining how these funds will be allocated.
Okay, so we set it up as a pros and cons as far as what the student-based funding or budgeting looks like. So the pros, in theory, the SBB system should be more equitable for schools and students, allotting funds where they are needed the most, gives principals the flexibility to site-based decisions to meet the needs of the students, and more transparency with the stakeholders about the budget and spending. Stakeholders are involved in the decision-making, and they would all be aware of what the magic formula was for each student. So then the cons is the system is new and often misunderstood. Extensive training is needed for the principals. Budgeting wisely is key. The freedom can be dangerous. Determining a point system can become, oh shoot.
Capricious.
Sorry. Yeah,
Did we lose you, Sarah?
Did we lose Sarah?
Well, one of the other, until Sarah comes back, how can we ensure that all stakeholders understand the process? So although the principal is said that they're going to reach out to all stakeholders, how can we really ensure that? And then it is illegal to take the minimum amount of allocated funds from a student to give it to another. So that was kind of the biggest issue that we saw with that.
Absolutely. All right, let me interject something that amplifies that point. Go back one slide. Okay. It says that the district piloted this at 4 schools last year. Well, how'd they do that? How do you think they did that? And was it legal? All right, so I'll tell you exactly how that worked. And it leads me to an example that I'm going to use. Superintendents have discretionary money up to a certain limit that they can spend without a board vote. So that's how he piloted. But so now you say, well, okay, then that was okay. But remember what the law said. Said not only is the state not going to do it, you're not supposed to do it at the local either, in order to trying to take from one and give to the other or give more. So my suspicion is in this case, and this is the interpretation, the superintendent used discretionary money to do that, but that is still illegal. You say, well, nobody'd be dumb enough to do that. Well, yes, they would be. And so let me show you that case right quick. Now, this is not from a million years ago in a land far, far away. This is from Chapel Hill, Carborough, where their superintendent did this very same thing. And let's see how it ended. Let's see how it ended for her. If you'll stop your share, I want to pull. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is such a teachable moment right here. So here's the deal. So the superintendent there, Chapel Hill, Carborough is truly the tale of two cities. The kids are white and affluent in Chapel Hill, and in Carborough, they're not. And so the superintendent tried her best to get some money or get some extra resources. The problem, state per pupil money mostly funds teachers. And that's what we're trying to do to get extra support to these kids that are struggling. But who hires new teachers? The superintendent or the board? The board. So you can't go hire new teachers with this discretionary money. So she partnered with this private organization, and basically they brought teachers in. That was all well and good to try to help support them until a retired principal who had a school law class said, wait a minute. She had a granddaughter in the Chapel Hill side. Wait a minute, this is all illegal. This pilot that you run and now trying to do this district wide, this is illegal. This violates the finding what was held in the Leandro case. So let's see, Chapel Hill, right here, pops right up, doesn't it? Right here it is. So what she did was her discretionary, but only get 90,000 to 90,000 in her district one time. But she had a long-term contract with this group to bring in extra teachers, and she was going to pay them. She had them split the contract up into different invoices so that they would send an invoice for $89,999 in order to try to get around the law. But in the end, she was violating Leandro, even though she was using her discretionary money. And so they fired the CFO. Contracts worth more than 90,000 required to have public school board, according to district policies. But she did about $1 million contract. They still owed about nearly 800,000 on it when they finally caught it. And so they fired the CFO. They let her resign. And you can read all about this, but this is not a far-fetched case. But the notion here is, it's possible that you could attempt such a thing as this, that you would attempt this. But eventually you're going to have to revert the money. You're probably going to get fined, and you're definitely going to get fired, and you're probably going to have to make some of that money back up. Neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding, have a fundamental right only to receive a basic education. Furthermore, the Supreme Court ruled the state of North Carolina, not local school districts, has the ultimate obligation. So what it means, you can't do this. Even if you want to, you cannot do this. It is illegal. And if you attempt some, this case was from two and a half, 3 years ago in Chapel Hill. Even if you attempt some way to subvert the system, even if you run a pilot with your discretionary money, eventually, even if you don't try to do it district-wide, even if you're trying to circumvent Leandro, they'll get you. Watch that documentary. It's also under 7 from RAL on this. Kim and I were talking earlier this week. There's a harder place in hell for some of these people, but elections have consequences. And so now they are vigilant on trying to catch people getting around this. They are determined that you're not going to differentiate money. It's just that simple. Now, the whole notion, we got the education lottery in North and South Carolina as a result of the Leandro case. But we know that lottery money, what little comes, and it ain't much, after they pay the winners, pay the lottery company, and that idiot with that signboard that comes on TV advertising the lottery every time my wife has it on. Clocks on your house if you watch television for them lottery commercials. By the time they pay all that bunch, there's no money left over. And it can only do capital projects anyway. It can't be used on the actual education of a child. And that's the irony of it. We don't want kids to get educated and know anything. They won't vote for our side. So, but the money that comes from the lottery, folks, cannot be used for education. It can only be used for capital for building. And so, while well-intended, this just can't be done. All right, back to our presentation.
Do you want me to
Sarah,
finish here?
yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I completely lost my internet. All right, I'll just start where I was. Determining a point system can be capricious. How can we ensure our stakeholders understand the process and it is illegal to take the minimum amount of allocated funds from a student to give to another?
Okay. So our examination, before we concluded our findings, was to answer the question, will the SBB plan hold up to Leandro? The superintendent's plan is to implement SBB, student-based budgeting, system-wide, which calls for allocating funds based on the number of students enrolled and the specific needs of those students within each school. There is no basis for what a sound basic education is defined as. This is why we think it's not going to hold up to Leandro. How can the principals of those schools ensure that they're providing every student with a sound basic education under the SBB plan? And that Leandro found that schools do not have any constitutional right to equal funding. So if this is a way to make funding more equitable across the district, it is unconstitutional. Jackie?
So our final thoughts, kind of like Dr. Lamb said, while the superintendent really does appear to mean well, this is a dangerous decision to put a value on students based on their perceived deficiencies, and there are too many unknown variables and subjective decisions in the letter he presented to the community and within the decisions that they are attempting to make. The uncertainty and attempt at equal funding is setting the district up for a lawsuit based on the precedent set in the Leandro case.
All right. Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. So now we're going to talk about first world, my gold shoes are too tight problem. Everybody understand that? We're going to talk about first world, my gold shoes are too tight problem. Tonight, I'm in Lake Louisville in my condo here. My property tax evaluation here is pretty low. And my millage assessment, city and county, I'm in the town of Lake Lure. City and county is only about 70 cents here, 70 cents for every $100 of evaluation. When I go to the big house at Lake Norman, where the Queen lives, she who must be obeyed. That's from Rumpole to the Bailey, my favorite. I watched one of those recently on Masterpiece Theater. When I go there to the big house, you know what my millage is there? $1.50, over 2 times more than it is here. Because I live on the last exit in Mecklenburg County at Lake Norman in the town of Cornelius. Mecklenburg has the highest tax millage or tax rate in North Carolina of the 100 counties, and Cornelius has the highest in Mecklenburg County. My evaluation there is at 100% of real value, where it's about 40% here. So what that means, last year when they did a tax reassessment, the evaluation on my home didn't go up too, just went up on top of what was already there, another 160,000 in the valuation. Again, first world, my gold shoes are too tight problem. As my wife says, if you can afford that vehicle that you drive, don't whine about gas prices. I appreciate that. Now, I wouldn't say that to her. That's how I've been married nearly 40 years. What I said to her was, yes, ma'am, you're right. So knowing that private neighborhood that I live in, waterfront neighborhood at Lake Norman, that only has 158 houses, do you think any of them people, I mean, they've all got more than they'll ever need, just like me. I've got tremendously more than I'll ever need. But do you think for a minute that they would stand by if you came into their school and said, we're going to help these kids over here. We're going to take money and teachers from your school and move them over to their school to help them. Do you think those people who have more than they'll ever need, do you think for a minute that they would stand by for that? Oh, they'd burn you out. They'd burn you out. It would not go well for you to tell them that. You know, the counterpart to the community that I live in, Huff High School there in Cornelius, is Audrey Kell at the southern end of the county down in Ballantyne. One of the students in last night's class, she's dean of students down at Ballantyne at Audrey Kell. I said, we're gonna tell your parents that those six vacancies you guys, your school, we're just gonna take those away. We're gonna give them to Garinger. She said, oh God, said you'd be dead. They'd assassinate you before you get in the building. Yes, they would. So you've got to look at it from both sides here. Yes, we might all think that it's the right thing to do to try to help, you know, some disadvantaged kids. The problem with that is the people that are the advantage, they don't want to give up what they've got. And they'll fight you tooth and nail, and they're more financially able and politically connected than the folks on the other end. So while Leandro looks bad on the surface, and it probably is, it's not likely to change anytime soon. This is the reality of public education. The folks that are in charge cater to those people because guess what? Rich people contribute to political campaigns and poor folks don't. They contribute to the grocery store trying to get enough to eat. That's you know, this is grown people talk for grown people. This is the world that we live in, and you've got to know that. And so we take this from a macro level. The superintendent, we need to understand, again, you can't be moving money around. The county commissioners give you that money. You don't have a taxing authority. And if you do something crazy like this with it, and remember, county commissioners are district based now. The people that are in the wealthier districts like District 1 in Mecklenburg County, which for some reason, I don't know how, gets the wealthy end of each end of the county, how they've gerrymandered that, I don't know. But the very top, the wealthiest part at the top and the bottom are one district. You think that their representative would ever vote for that or vote for a school board budget that allowed that to happen? No way in the world. So you can't move, we know you can't move federal money. All federal money program tracks with kids. You can't move state money because Leandro said you can't. You can't move local money. And even if you try to use your discretionary money, they'll eventually catch you. They will eventually catch you. They might not the first day, but it won't take long. They'll catch you. And so, you know, although we try our best to equalize, but now somebody in the other class pointed out that, well, you got Title I to try to help kids and you can use that money. But again, let me remind you, you got to be careful with federal money. Title I money can only, if you're a Title I school, 80% or more free and reduced lunch, you can use that money for every kid in your building. Like put it, you know, kids in Title I teachers class, you know, try to help balance the load. But if you're a Title I program, you can't do that. So again, you got to know how the money works and how it goes. But even at your local school level where you have a budget, you got to be really careful with these kinds of things. Dr. Sane, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, let me unmute. Again, I don't have anything groundbreaking to share. Just everything that you're saying is true. I mean, federal money, we've talked about that. When it comes to budget, I followed the rules to the T. I did not make any stray decisions. I involved everybody I could involve. I asked questions all the time because, I mean, money, like you say, is just a way to lose your job and lose your house.
Yeah.
So I just, it sounds so easy saying it, but when you get in those positions, when you get into an assistant principal and a principalship, it's hard to have to rely on other people. But by God, when it comes to money, make sure you've got a team that you can ask questions to, so that you can make sure you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. And to reiterate my story that I tell all the time, you round the curve in Raleigh on 40 and head toward Wilmington. Halfway between Raleigh and Wilmington, you come to 42 there at Newton Grove. You get off and head east across the state toward Topsail. About halfway is community of Chinkapin. I mean, you're so far out in the woods that I told you, your GPS just sits and spins. You finally find the school. I got there. I had to wait an hour to visit with the principal because I had an intern in the school. I had to go back 2 weeks later to meet the new principal because they were having a Title I audit when I got there. They were a Title I program, not a Title I school. He had put non-Title I kids in the Title I teachers class to balance the loads across third grade because the regular ed teachers were whining and complaining. Why she only got 14, we got 30. Well, he took some, put in her room, and I'm sure picked up the phone that day and called Raleigh and said, I've got 16 non-Title I kids in my class. And they were there the next day. The point about it being an out of the way place, they didn't just drop by for an unannounced audit. You couldn't even find the place. They came specifically, and that was the last day that he was employed in that district. You don't misspend federal money but one time. And so there is no beating the rules. I know that your heart's in it. You want to help kids as much as you can. The point of this case is you can't beat the rule. We have to play within the rules of the game. And even though it might be the ethical thing, you might feel morally obligated to try to do things for kids. You just can't. You just can't. You're sacrificing your career and your house if you do. The two things that will get you the quickest is, you know, your money and your honey. You know, misspending money and having inappropriate relationships with people at the school. Those, and we'll cover both of those this semester. But those are the two things that will get you fired the quickest of anything in the world. Money being number one. You've got to know. You know, we can't stress this enough. I'm beating a dead horse here, but I'm telling you, you got to know. You just got to know these things. All right, so let's go on to group 3 with your presentation.
Okay, group 3 includes myself, Allison, Shelton, and Everlyn Holiday. We decided to kind of start off with some background information about Leandro versus State. So it was first filed in 1994. It included parents in 5 low-wealth counties, which are, I'm going to state in a moment, but they argued that the students did not have access to an adequate education. Those 5 low-wealth counties included Hope County, Robeson County, Vance, Halifax, and Cumberland. These districts did not have the money to support a sound basic education, even though the residents were taxed at a higher than average rate. They also could not compete with wealthier school districts in terms of teacher pay, special services, and educational materials. With Leandro versus state, it was determined that all students in North Carolina have a right to receive a sound basic education. And in 1997, the Supreme Court ruled that the state of North Carolina, not local school districts, has the constitutional obligation to safeguard and successfully deliver every child's Leandro right.
In 2004, a North Carolina lower court ruled that the state was not providing the sound basic education. It was stated that every classroom must have a certified teacher and a well-trained principal in every school.
All right, so let me ask you the question.
Okay.
That's the West Ed report. Fairly recently, within the last 2 years or year and a half,
Yes.
they put a dollar figure on that. How much did they say that the state of North Carolina has been short on providing that basic education? Not only are we're not allowing or not paying for kids to get all the, to get the bells and whistles, but we're not even paying for a basic ed. How much did they say that we're short? Anybody know? Anybody read the West Ed report?
I don't remember. I know that we've gone back and forth a whole lot. We're still going back and forth.
They said that, it's in the billions, but they said that to start with, that they need to appropriate $2 billion just to start. That's how far short we've fallen. So that 7,000 a year and now 8 has been nowhere near what it takes to provide a basic ed either. But now the General Assembly, is fighting that. They forced Judge Lee into retirement and let the second judge go. And the General Assembly says you can't make us 90-90 boo-boo. These are grown people. But yes. So the kind of the linchpin of the whole Leandro is we're not going to differentiate the money because we're going to safeguard everybody's right to a sound basic education. But oh, by the way, we're not going to fund that either. And so that needs to be said when we talk about that. And I'm glad you brought that up, Allison, is that we've not done either. We've not helped the kids on the lower end of the spectrum. We haven't really helped or paid for all kids. We're woefully short on how much money we should have been spending to educate kids.
Right.
That's not in doubt. Now, whether or not they'll ever get any money out of the General Assembly, I kind of doubt it. But, that's what the judge has said. You owe $2 billion now and more later. And said probably up to about $7 billion. But we want $2 billion now. And they said, no, we ain't giving you any now. Or none.
Yes.
$2 billion or we'll give you none.
And it keeps changing.
Yes. Please continue.
Okay. The superintendent's plan. His plan was student-based budgeting. There were 2 names for it, also called site-based budgeting, SBB. Gives the authority to principals to allocate funds among line items. To be successful, instructional stakeholders in the school need to be involved in decision-making for the budget. The superintendent's plan is not appropriate because it is illegal to move money around. The per pupil funding cannot be changed. And then problems. Evie, are you going to read the problems?
Yeah, I can read that part.
Okay.
So the problems is everyone has to work together and be in agreement that the money is for the needs of the students. Example, the math department cannot get upset if the English department receives money that they feel should have gone to them instead. SBB money distribution can be one-time intensive within a district based on need. If the student transfers, will the money follow them? Does the money change at all during the school year?
So there's a lot of questions about this model. There are site-based budgeting models in some states. They use a district power equalizing formula and differentiate the money that comes. But there's a lot of questions even with that, and we'll talk about a couple of those things. There are formulas out there, but now again, they are illegal in North and South Carolina.
Okay. The positive enhances equity in funding by allocating dollars to schools based on the number of students enrolled and the specific needs of those students. Grade levels and at-risk learners have a predetermined weight that equals real dollar amounts.
All right.
And references.
Thank you. Now I am going to tell a story on myself because the statute of limitations ran out a couple years ago on this. This is absolutely a true story. So after the Vietnam War, we had a lot of refugees from Southeast Asia, most notably the Hmong population. And they were allies of the United States during the Vietnam conflict. And we started moving them over to this country, most notably the Hmong folks, the northern parts of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, the Hill people. And so there was a large population of them at the school where I was principal. And obviously there was a language barrier that we had between us and them. And so back in the day, much like the proposed school-based budgeting, principals had to make free and reduced lunch decisions. And that's what we're talking about here. It's the same kind of thing. We had formulas that we had to go by. And that's one of the problems with the school-based funding or site-based or school-based funding is somebody has to make decisions about what's the criteria and who gets the money. Well, having experienced that, I had to do that same thing to determine who got free and reduced lunch back in the day. That's been gone for 30 years, but prior to that, we had to do that. Well, here's the kind of things that happen. And this actually, I'm the village idiot. I'll be the first to acknowledge because this is what I did. I had a parent came in and she wanted to know why I had adjudicated her family as reduced lunch rather than free lunch. And I tried to explain the formula. She was a Hmong speaking person and we had a language barrier and the math and all that stuff. And I wasn't very good at explaining it. And so finally what I said, here's the bottom line, ma'am. You either have to make less money as a family or you have to have more children. So 2 hours later, she showed up with a baby in her arm. I cannot make that up. And so I said, it's free lunch for you. Now that I'm quite sure that I violated federal law when I did that. And that's why I said the statute of limitations ran out on that 3 years ago, thank goodness. Or I'd still be worried about they're going to come and get me over that. But that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. That is the biggest drawback to school-based or site-based funding is somebody has to make those kinds of decisions. And more than likely, you're going to get it wrong. That is the problem with states that try to do that kind of formula. And so what everybody has done is moved away from site-based or school-based and gone to a similar system called district power equalizing, where the state adjusts the money that they send rather than you do it at the local level, because that's just so, it's just so hard and so much area there for abuse and mistakes. And that's one of the bigger issues is understanding that in district power equalizing, the state does that based on the economic health of your district. But even then, you have to determine at the local level who gets what. So it's even if we had the right to do it in practice, in theory, in practice, it's still a nightmare to try to do it. It's virtually impossible to do that. Now, please understand. Remember, the state does not send you $8,000 at the beginning of the year. Please remember, we had this brought up last night. Please remember how school funding works. The district has to have money on hand to pay for the first month of school. And then they voucher the state. And if the state says you spent the money appropriately, they reimburse the money that you spent minus your absentee rate. And they only send you 1/10 of the money. Remember that. They don't send all 8,000 at one time. They send 800 a month per child minus your absentee rate. They do not pay for kids on the roll. They only pay for kids in attendance. And they only reimburse you your money that you spent up front if they deem that you have spent it appropriately. And that's why that school-based deal and that site-based deal, that's where the sand gets in the gears. What if the state says you didn't do this right, or we found abuses, or your formula didn't work, or fill in the blank with excuses? The state doesn't have to send you any money. They call it flipping the switch, by the way. And they'll tell you, we don't get this data, or you don't do this, or you don't fix that, we'll just flip the switch. And what that means is you don't get your check that month. Then you're in trouble. So while I'd like to think in a perfect world that it would be best to have site-based or school-based budgeting, because the state sends you the money monthly, and because they only send you to reimburse what you've already spent, and if they deem what you have done was not an appropriate expenditure, you're out. I'm telling you, the risk of that is so great that even I, who am a proponent of trying to get extra help for kids, I can't buy into that one myself. It's not a good idea. In practice, it's just unmanageable in practice. And you risk not getting your state money, and you know that you can't do that. You can't stay in business if you can't get your state money. So you got to remember how money comes from the state to school districts, and remembering what does 85% of that state money pay for? Teacher salaries. Ask the people in Gaston County how it goes if you don't get your paycheck. Not happy campers, by the way. So you can't have that. And then you have to go to the county commissioners and say, would you give us some money? Would you float us a loan so we can pay our people so we can get this payroll mess with the state figured out? That doesn't go well either. They don't have a lot of sympathy for you. So while on the surface it appears like that would be a solution to this problem, in reality it is not. I hate to say that, it really isn't. And we have the notion that the upper end people won't, if you're taking from their kids, they're not going to be happy either. So while it's well intended in theory, in practice, it's virtually impossible to pull this off. Not only is it illegal, but from a more practical sense, it's impractical as well, unfortunately. That's the sad but true tale. All right, group 2.
Okay. So we are group 2, myself, Kelly, Kim, Licia, Lana, and Mike. So we kind of did the same thing, similar background. Go ahead and put this up. Superintendent wants to implement student-based budgeting after being piloted in his district for the following reasons. Funds would follow students. At-risk learners would receive more funds. The new budgeting system would address students and schools' diverse needs. And 34 states currently use this model, according to the Education Commission of the states, the 2023 report. So we kind of pulled in what is student-based budgeting. It's got a lot of other names for it, such as student-based allocations, weighted student funding, fair student funding, and student-centered funding. But what it does is it allocates dollars instead of staff or materials. It's based on the 3 pillars of equity, transparency, and flexibility. It uses objectives and measurable student characteristics as weight, and it is designed around those 3 pillars. And this is just an example of student-based budgeting versus the traditional school budgeting that
Right.
Dr. Lamb was just talking about.
Yeah. Now remember, the states that use this, it's set up from the state level so that it works all the way through. When I say it won't work in North Carolina, it's because of how we fund schools from the state level. We would have to change that. And that's what the General Assembly says, no. That's what Leandro said. We're not changing to a district power equalizing formula from the state level, which would allow for school-based budgeting. So to try to do school-based budgeting under the current funding model, it's apples and oranges. It just won't work. If you start at the state level, and that's what the Leandro lawsuit was about, if we change how the state sets up funding, then we can pull it off. But to try to pull it off with the existing funding model from the state, it's just apples and oranges. The gears don't mesh. That's the whole notion. That's what Leandro was about. Leandro was not about really getting money for it was about, we want you to change the system of funding so that it would allow for a model like this. But you can't put a model like school-based funding or school-based budgeting or site-based in if you have a flat grant formula funding system from your state. They don't mesh. They don't meet. That's the issue. That's why I said the reality is, even if we tried to do this, until the General Assembly and the Supreme Court change the fundamental structure of funding from flat grant to district power equalizing, it won't work. It can't work. That's our problem. And that's the fundamental case of Leandro is we wanted to change the entire funding model from flat grant, everybody gets the same, to district power equalizing, which gave more money based on the economic conditions of wealth in those districts. So again, that's the very fundamental piece that we're talking about in this case. That's the underpinning to the Leandro case. Excellent job here.
So with that, we just kind of discussed that the student-based budgeting is different than the traditional budgeting system.
Mm-hmm.
In the traditional funding system, resources are distributed to schools in the form of staff and dollars designated for specific purposes. And as a result, principals in traditional systems have limited flexibility over their resources. So many districts provide little transparency as to why schools get what they get, which makes it difficult to assess how equitably the funding system allocates resources.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about the Leandro versus state of North Carolina, again, it was filed in 1994 when parents argued that students in 5 low-wealth counties in North Carolina did not have adequate education. Neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding. All children residing in North Carolina have a fundamental state constitutional right to the opportunity to receive a sound basic education. And so the Supreme Court ruling was the state of North Carolina, not the local school districts, has the ultimate constitutional obligation to actively safeguard and successfully deliver every child's Leandro right with no exceptions and no excuses. So going into our pros and cons, we just wanted to start with that regardless of the pros and cons, that this plan is illegal because you cannot change the funding formula, which directly violates these Leandro rights for all students to have a fundamental right to the opportunity to receive a sound basic education.
So that bottom section there says everybody gets the same, period. Because that's what a flat grant system is based on. That's the fundamental principle of state funding in North Carolina and South Carolina is that everybody has to get the same. And even if we give you the same, you're not allowed at the local level, again, the state, not the local, you can't manipulate that in any way. That would be deemed taking money from one and giving it to another. Everybody's got to get the same. No change in the formula is the bottom line.
So now we're just going to kind of discuss a little bit if the superintendent's plan is appropriate. We also did kind of a pro and con model. So for support for the superintendent's plan, one of the things is that it would give more control over for the school leaders for their budget. And that would allow for them to allocate those resources to how they deemed fit. And then Kim.
Yeah, and then we also talked about an advantage is just the focus on the student and how that money could support specific goals for the students and the school in that district. And during our pre-meeting, we also talked about like specialized staff that we might need that we could hire if we had this type of school-based budgeting. And so we felt like it would really support diverse populations of students, including special needs students, AIG, ELL, when that money does follow the students.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went into the cons or the concerns about our superintendent's plan. So I was looking at Lana, Alicia.
All right, so we talked about equitable distribution. So felt like where that really becomes a problem is when if it's a site-based funding, it gets into the hands of the principal. The transparency that needs to be there to make sure that the principal is not arbitrarily spending money in ways that's not beneficial to all. What's the equitable distribution of it? Is that going to be clear? Some of the things that we talked about were the fact that, and Dr. Sain mentioned this earlier in class, having a team in the SBB model, it talks about the fact that you would have to have a good team around you where you talk about allocating the funds. So that the principal does have that transparency and doesn't run into issues with showing where you have this equitable distribution of the funds. And so putting that into the hands of the people that are going to be most responsible for instructional concepts, the environment the stakeholders that are going to be involved in that within those environments. What type of say do they have in the allocation of funds? Are you bringing those people on board and building a team around that so that there is transparency in it? And then looking at accountability, the demands of the new funds on the building principals. Again, was the principal going to get into trouble for arbitrarily spending funds? Is he going to have a really good solid plan for where the distribution of those funds is going to go? And as we've all talked about already, will the wealthier schools lose funding, and how upset those wealthier schools are going to be when they lose funding? Because it really isn't fair to take from those schools because of the location they live in. But at the same time, the understanding that you want the schools that don't have the wealth to have what they need at the same time. And then what happens when students transfer? So you mentioned a few minutes ago about attendance. So like we know the first 20 days or so are really important in the school year. And so what happens when students transfer with the money? If the money follows the student and a student transfers out, then what happens to the funding that was with that particular student? So all of these are just questions that, really need to be answered in this SBB model.
Yeah, and that's part of that how the money is sent from the state. I mean, that money tracking with the students doesn't match in the school base, doesn't match how you get sent the money. So yeah, that's a big problem. Now you can fix that with how you send the money, but if you're going to continue to send the money the same way, that problem's not fixable. That was the issue. The heart of Leandro was changing the funding model. That was what so that you could have something like SBB, student-based or site-based. But as long as you have flat grant, as you point out here, transferring is a nightmare. And that's not a problem you can fix unless you fix how the money is sent to begin with. So, it's just that there is no fix. You cannot in a flat grant formula state do school-based budgeting at the local level. It just won't work. It will work if your state is set up that way. And that's what Leandro, again, to be redundant, that's what Leandro was about, was changing how money is sent and how funding is done at the state level so that it could be used differently at the local level. But they said no. They said no.
Okay, Lana, you did a good job starting off talking about accountability, so I'm gonna finish up. So accountability is the fact or condition of being accountable, responsible. So the stakeholders will be held accountable. They're responsible for the funds, the input money versus the output, the performance. Like Dr. Lamb said, tracking the budget by site level, desegregated groups or the student at the state level, and then performance will have to be connected to the resources. So the stakeholders will pretty much have to be held accountable for how the funds would be spent to make sure that they're meeting the requirements for the student, in the different groups.
Mike, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, with the part of the money what has been allocated, you know that you have the 20-day model where you have to do the head count. Also for the EC kids, you have the December 1 head count and then the end of year head count. So with kids being moving pieces, what would happen to the money that's being allocated for student-based budgeting? Who will be in charge of taking care of those things? Because the system schools depend on those type of funding as well. So how that's going to affect students that's in the special population? Also, how this going to affect the ADM when they're trying to allocate the money per year per building?
All right. When y'all get through, I want to talk about the 20-day count. Continue on. Remind me to talk about the 20-day count.
Okay, so we're just wrapping up. So our ultimate verdict is a superintendent plan appropriate. We said for our pro, it would be yes, because funding would follow the needs of the learner and gives local school leaders more control over their budget. But against it would be who's making sure that the funds are being allocated appropriately, what happens to the funds when the students transfer, and just ultimately, we want to wrap it back up. The superintendent's plan is not appropriate as it directly violates the North Carolina policy on the state providing a sound and basic education, not equal, but a sound and basic education.
That is correct. All right. Thank you. It's a great presentation. Let's talk about the 20-day count. Understanding how funding works in North and South Carolina. So the district has to pay for the first month. They have to have funds accounts. Now, back in the day, we used to have like 6 months of, we could run the schools for 6 months. Because times are tough, usually we only have 1 month of fund balance to fund schools. The wealthy districts only have 2 now. So what happens is why that 20-day count is so important. What we did is we swagged what we were going to need for the first month in terms of the number of teachers allotted to every school. What is a swag? What is the swag method? None of you are my doctoral students. We learned this in methodology, doctoral students. Swag is SWAG. It's simply a stupid wild ass guess. We just guessed how many we were going to need. We used the swag method to determine how many teachers everybody was going to get. We just swagged it. I'll just tell you the truth, because I've sat in those meetings, the central office. We just guessed. We could look at housing patterns and we could look at enrollments and all that, but things change. 1 year in Charlotte, IBM snuck out in the middle of the night, and we had Vance, which is now Chambers High School, staffed for 2,500 kids, and about 1,400 showed up. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. IBM slipped out in the middle of the night and didn't tell anybody. And it was a workplace magnet out on IBM Drive, that high school. Ouch. And so the reason why we get beat the bushes and try to do, because we have guests and we're paying for those people. And if we got more teachers than we've got kids, the state won't pay for them. The state picks up, remember, the state picks up after the first month, they reimburse us And we may lose some money, but they're not going to pay for those teachers on and on. Well, you know, they need that extra teacher over there. The state's not going to send money for them. And so that's why that 20-day count, you know, getting it close to right is real important, because every how much you've overspent, you have to eat that. State won't reimburse it. You just have to eat it. It's just money out of your balance. So if you say, for example, if you're in a district and you employ 3,000 teachers, and at the end of 20 days, you only need 2,900, you lose the salary for that 100 teachers, and you have to send them home because the state's not going to pay for them. And then you have to reschedule your school and divide those kids out. And how does that make those teachers and parents feel in those rooms that had 20 in them, and all of a sudden they got 30 in them? So that 20-day, that's why that 20-day count, but that's the reason why so much is riding on it. Not only will the state not reimburse you for too many teachers that you hired for that first month, they make you let them go as well, because they're not going to pay them going forward either. So Kim's question is do residency license teachers cost the same? No, they do not. And that's one of the ways that that districts, just like with what's the domestic Peace Corps for schools? Where you get the young people
AmeriCorps.
Teach for America.
Teach for America.
America.
Yeah.
Those only cost you $15,000, by the way. And so that's why you try to get as many of those as you can on the local budget. If you're a district like Charlotte that hires a lot of local teachers, so they would use local money to pay for them because they were the cheapest. Districts that do residency teachers, they're doing them because they have to, but in normal times, the reason why you would hire residency teachers is you pay them less, and it's coming out less out of the local budget. That's only for districts that spend extra on education. Now, these low wealth districts can't do that. Sandra, you got a question?
Yeah, so my question is, based upon the districts in this SBB model, is there any data, has the state put together any data that shows the breakdown of how people who have used this process, how they've allocated their funds, like to what areas? And I mean, do you know of any?
Yeah, there's plenty of data out there that suggests that this is a better model if your goal is to educate kids.
And it actually shows where the allocations were?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you got to set it up from the state level all the way down, from your General Assembly where the money comes from all the way down. You got to want to. This is not a we can't, we don't want to. Because what you find is when you set these systems up, you tend to spend more and kids get more and better. Don't ever think that all politicians want you to get more and more and better education for your kids. That's not the case. So we know that a school-based budgeting state system is better for teaching and learning and better for kids. It costs more though. It does cost more. We know that as well. And that's why one political party and specifically knows that teachers and those kind of people never vote for them, and so they're not interested in funding at a level where kids get all they need. They're just interested in funding a basic level because many of their constituents go to private schools anyway. And so that's grown people talk. That's the reality. And so as long as those people are in charge at the state level, the elected officials, they're never going to change because it does not benefit them politically to change to a model where kids get a better education. They're trying to drive kids out of public education now and do vouchers so that all their friends and contributors make millions of dollars. They see all those millions and billions of dollars going to public education, and they just see that as money that we want. We want that money. Our friends and our contributors want that money. So there's no benefit for them. Actually, it's a detriment for schools to work, public schools to work well. They need for public schools not to work well so that people who are capable go to private schools so that we get that money. That's that's the nature of the business. This is not a case of we don't know what to do. This is a case we don't have the political will to do it. And we're not going to let local districts do it either. Not only are we not going to do it, we're not going to let them do it because it doesn't suit our needs. And so that's the environment that you're going to be working in. Now, and the lesson to be learned here is not really a political one. It's the lesson to be learned here is don't sacrifice yourself, your career, your job, your house, Tilton Windmills here, Don Quixote, to mix metaphors here. You can't be the Lone Ranger here and save the day. You've got to work within the laws and policies of the state and the district you work in. As I'll remind you again, one of the first questions you'll be asked during that cattle call phase of your first interview for an AP is there's a policy or a rule or a law that you don't agree with, will you follow it? And the answer is yes, I will. Otherwise, you'll never get the opportunity. I mean, that's what, we can disagree with this, to the nth degree, but we know that what our job is to follow the law. It's unfortunate, and we know there's better models, but we don't have a better model. We have what we have, and we have to work within that. So that's why we do that gap analysis, and we try to find programs for our own schools and try to do better. Of course, the superintendent of South Carolina is pushing vouchers. That we want that money. We see that billions in education. We want it. Our friends want it. Our benefactors, our campaign contributors, they want that money. But
Dr. Lamb, can I share?
Sure.
When we were doing the research for this case study, I found the Education Commission of the States. I was not familiar with that website, but that commission actually tracks laws that are in the different states legislation considered, considering to be bills and laws. And it also breaks down the states and how they do the different district equalizing. Because when I talked to Dr. Lamb this week and I heard Phil Berger say, no, not everyone is getting a sound basic education in North Carolina. And then he posed his own question, well, what's the appropriate thing to do? How do we decide? And he said, let parents choose where they go to school. And that was just very upsetting to me that he said, basically he was endorsing private charter vouchers.
What he is saying is we have intentionally made public schools bad so that you'll leave and pay. And then we're going to try to get tax money for our friends for you to pay vouchers and pay part of it. But he admitted, he said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, he did.
There's a corner of hell I'm hoping as a Christian that's harder for him than the one that I'm gonna be in, because I'm still Saul on the road to Damascus. I ain't Paul yet. I'm trying. I'm doing my very best. But I'm telling you, but he said the quiet part out loud. We're not going to fund or make sure schools are good because we're trying to get everybody to go over here to private school because that's where our constituents are.
And like we said, 34 states in the United States don't do what we're doing in North Carolina.
Exactly. And we had the chance 30 years ago through the Leandro case to change that. But no. Now, full disclosure, I've told you this before. I was on the legal team for the plaintiffs. So I'm still mad as hell that we lost 30 years later. And it's like I still won't punch somebody in the nose. 30 years later, I'm still mad. So yeah, is it sour grapes for me? Yes, it is. But I also know the data. 34 states are doing much better than we are because they're willing to do the right thing, not the political thing, to make sure that their donors and benefactors are get wealthier. They're actually interested in the education of their children, not the money. And that's been borne out, and thank you for that, Kim. Kim and I talked about this. The data is very clear that this is an antiquated and very much basically a system of apartheid is what this is. And it's not good, but it's what we have. And we can't let our emotions or our desire to do the right thing override what we have to do legally. And that's the whole heart of this case. It's that question that you're going to be asked. You know, will you follow the laws and policies of the state and the local district if we hire you to this job? You know, will you do the right and legal thing, what is considered the right thing? That you won't do something crazy if we put you in charge. Now, you know, the former superintendent in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, I met her. You know, I think her heart was in the right place. Part of her problem is she thought she was the smartest person in the room. I fully concede she was smarter than me, but that's kind of like me and Dr. Sane running from the bear. He ain't got to be faster than me, faster than the bear. He's just got to be faster than me. So, you know, the deal with her is she could be smarter than me, but she couldn't beat the law. She thought she was smart enough to beat the law. She is the poster child for nobody can outrun the law. I don't care how smart you are, nobody can outrun the law. And that's exactly what happened to her. And so, while it might be, you know, in your heart, the right thing to do, this is the case that drives home how funding works, but it's bigger than just funding. It's about understanding your role as a school administrator, what you're tasked to do as a school administrator. That's really the essence of what you're supposed to learn from this, is whether you agree with it or whether you don't. You always got to follow law and policy. All right, we're ready for group number 1, our last group of the evening. We're right on time. We're actually a couple minutes early. Y'all are doing such a great job. I'm so pleased.
All right, can everybody see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just want to make sure you can hear me. All right, so we are the last group to go tonight, group 1. We've got Nemo Branch, Michelle Brunson, myself, Kristen Carroll, Derek Crockett, and Christina Davis. All right, so the overview of the case, as everyone knows, is the superintendent sent a letter to the community about a pilot program that had been implemented in the school system using the student-based budget for the schools. And part of the theory behind the student-based budgeting is that it's based off of the 3 pillars: equity, transparency, and flexibility. The superintendent announced to the community that the system would be rolled out to the entire district and that the principals would explain more. And that the formula for allocation of the funds was being altered and the money would now follow the student.
Right. School districts that have not been able to raise the revenue have been forced to increase class sizes and reduce programs to balance their budget. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 and No Child Left Behind are 2 pieces of federal legislation that was instrumental in supplementing state monies devoted towards this. The goal of those were to ensure that all students, including those with disabilities, have a fair, equal, significant education. Federal government provides 8.5% of school monies, and the other half comes from the state. They send it in 10 payments in South Carolina and North Carolina. It's distributed in 1 flat rate per student capital. Basically, school districts are giving you a gift card to a shoe store. You can only use it at that shoe store, but when you get to the shoe store, you only have enough for 1 shoe, and that's all you get. You can't add any money to it. Local money comes from the county taxes. The county commissioner is the person that kind of regulates that. I can speak to that here in Lexington County. We paid big money in our taxes for new schools, and now we are out of money and we have 2 more schools to build. And so they are now coming back to ask for more money, and they may have a little money in the pot. They decided that they want to use it for something else, but the commissioner said no.
Do we have Michelle?
I'm sorry, forgot to unmute too. School-based budgeting, what it is, it gives the authority to principals to allocate funds among various line items in a budget. The per student funding will vary based on the need of the student. All stakeholders must be involved in the process, allocate dollars directly to school based on the number of students enrolled and the specific needs of those students. And it empowers administrators by allowing them to make decisions for the allocation of money to programs and positions that directly impact students. Now, as we all know, this is totally illegal. So.
One of the most important educational cases to ever come, well, probably the most important educational case to ever come through North Carolina is Leandro. Leandro, this ruling stated that it is the responsibility of North Carolina to provide a sound basic education to all students, and it has been ongoing in one way or another since 1994. It's my understanding that the original plaintiffs, that they lost the case. Is that right? But the Supreme Court still made a ruling as it relates to what a sound basic education was. And the sound basic education ruling states that schools will have competent, certified, well-trained teachers. Schools will have competent, well-trained principals, and the resources necessary to support effective instructional programs to meet the needs of all students. And I probably should have put right there the basic learning needs of all students.
Right.
Because it's not going to be anything more than that.
All right, let me interject right here. You got to understand what happened here. And Derek's brought up a great point here. When the ruling came down, it looked like that the plaintiffs were going to prevail. And when the ruling came down, it was kind of a upset victory for the state. But they kind of threw but the subsequent challenges and appeals have used their own wording against them. So when they said, nope, we're not changing our funding formula, and neither can the district and neither can the schools, because a child is guaranteed. But remember, you don't get protection of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, because public schools are provided for in the preamble to the Constitution, not the Constitution itself, as states may provide. So all we have to do is a basic education. That's it. The people who lost and who have subsequently appealed and injunctioned, they're using their own words against them. Okay, what is a sound basic education? You said that's all that we have to, you're going to pay for. We're saying you're not paying for that. And so I'll bet if that decision was written today rather than 1997 when it was written, it wouldn't even reference sound basic education. They were using that as the excuse to why they didn't have to change the funding. But the litigants have seized on that as an opportunity or a stick to beat them with. And that's where Wested and these additional, like these other rulings that Derek is alluding to here. But trust me, the state was not saying we're going to give you this. What the state was saying in the original ruling is this is all you get, and you ought to be happy with that. But the litigants have used that very language that the court handed down to say 90-90 boo-boo, to say, all right, what is that, and are you providing it? And the Wested report said no, they're not. And so what they originally thought is well, this will end all argument and discussion. This is the reason why. has been turned against them, and they don't like it. And so now the response is, we ain't paying. We don't care what you say. We're just not paying. I don't care that the judge said you owe us $2 billion this year. We're not paying. So please remember here that the state was not, the Supreme Court was not guaranteeing anybody or giving people anything. They were using the sound basic education as an excuse as to why they didn't have to change the funding, because this is all you get. But the litigants since that time have used that very language against them, and the people in charge don't like that, to the point where they've now said, all right, but we ain't paying. We don't care what you say. We're not paying. So it's gotten really ugly as of late.
Okay, now there's a lot on this, and this is just a timeline of events, and I'm not going to go through that because it's a quagmire of idiocy on some levels.
It is.
But one of the things, as I was reading about West Ed and the recommendations that they made in regards to this, they had this long process and they did all of these things, but they made these recommendations, and they said that the state should come up with a system of teacher development and recruitment, that there should be a principal development system, that there should be an adequate, equitable, and predictable funding system, which failed at, that there should be a system that addresses multiple measures of student performance. There should be support for low-performing districts and schools, and a system of early education and alignment of high school to post-secondary and career expectations. But probably one of the takeaways from this is that these are recommendations.
Yeah, this is what they said you would need to have for a basic education. But again, the lawmakers in the legislature don't agree that these are components of a basic education. I mean, and like you say, West Ed is not binding. And so every time the judge rules in favor of the West Ed group, they just replace the judge. And when that didn't work, they did fairly recently just said 90-90 boo-boo. We don't have to. We don't care that they say we owe you this. We're not giving it to you. You can't make us.
Phil Berger.
And so yeah, Phil Berger, you can't make us. That's how intelligent their argument is now. You can't make us.
All right, Christina.
All right, wealthier schools will see a decrease in per student allocation funds. Assumption that local money will make up the difference is not true. LEAs are not allowed to change the local formula. Federal and state money cannot be manipulated. Schools with greater need will receive more funding per student. This alters the local formula and is in a violation of Leandro. Local boards and commissioners are responsible for approving the reallocation of local funds to be used in other areas.
We analyzed the paradigms of ethic related to justice, professional care, and critique. So we said that for justice, the superintendent, he tried to ensure that every student had the same opportunity. I think he had good intentions, but he didn't use, what formula did he use for that? And we just have to be reminded that it's not the LEA's job to revise the funding formula. It's the state's job. He didn't allow that to happen. The superintendent was arbitrary and capricious because the funding decisions, they were his own decisions. Although he had good intentions, he saw a need, and I guess ethically he wanted to fix that. But the law states that procedures must be followed correctly, and he didn't do that. For a professional, there was misfeasance in the case. The principal was acting inappropriately by using his power as a leader. He was the superintendent of the school to allocate funds inappropriately. He failed to follow the law with how he distributed the funds and his actions, although they, again, were unintentional, he felt as though he was doing the right thing for his school. He was performing a lawful action in an improper fashion. For CARE, he attempted to support the unrepresented children, but he wanted to include the principals in the decisions that were made, and he attempted to be transparent with the families, but I don't still think he did a good job. He didn't address the needs of the diverse students by doing that, and he also didn't safeguard the values of diversity. And then critique, it looks like he is showing favoritism, and he's rewriting the local formula, and this is not legal.
Okay. All right, so we're down to our last line. Basically, we looked at what was appropriate and not appropriate. A necessary step to ensure equity for students. Needed funds will follow the student wherever they go and will be based on the need of the student. And then the SBB has the 3 pillars of equity, transparency, and flexibility. And then what is not appropriate is the wealthier or better off schools may suffer because of that plan. And what happens when the funds, when the student is transferred based on the Leandro, the superintendent's plan is a violation, and LEAs, as Naima said, cannot change the per pupil funding, and the schools with more at-risk students or students with needs will receive, sorry, I've got my Zoom thing down there, will receive more funding other than other students, and school funding is inconsistent. How do I stop?
All right. Excellent job tonight. Dr. Sane, before I do our wrap up, you got any final thoughts from your part?
Yeah, so I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here a bit, because one of the disadvantages to this student-based funding is that it is subjective, and we've actually talked about that. And as a principal, I lived in the world where I didn't want things to be subjective. And it's funny, over the past 2 weeks, I've been in Arkansas and I've been in Oregon. Both of those states use this student-based funding model. And the reason they called me out there to support them is because they have recently had an influx of like 300% in referrals for special education. You want to know why they've had that influx? Ooh. Because they've got principals who know that they'll get more money if they identify students for special ed. And so they're blaming all of the unfinished learning from COVID as a learning disability. So there are pros and cons to everything. At the end of the day, what it takes is ethics and people who are willing to follow the law, follow policy, and follow the rules. And when you assume a principalship, assistant principal or principal, sometimes that's the first thing that goes out the window. And I sound like a broken record, but I say it all the time. If a principal calls me with the problem, I say, okay, what does the policy say? What does the law say? And why are you not following it? And then there's always but this is best, this is right. And okay, you can have your beliefs and your opinions, but at the end of the day, principals with ethics are successful. So regardless of whatever funding method we use, I'm certainly not a fan of what we currently use, but I just know that the SBB also has its problems because it comes down to ethics of implementing those budgets. So that was just my 2 cents. I think it's just timely that I've been in those 2 states the past 2 weeks to support them with some of these concerns. So great job tonight for everybody.
Yeah, great job. But again, it's about who you are and doing the right thing. And any system when there's unethical behavior fails. You got to be the right person who does the right thing. So this week's shout outs. Now everybody knows that you can go to discussion board and read everybody's posts on different things. So the shout out are the things that caught my eye this week. I love Sarah's response to cyberbullying. She related an incident where a parent brought in a private device to the school. Something happened outside of the school on not a school device, but the school did the right thing. If you want to read that one, that's a great one. Thank you, Sarah.
It was a school device and it was happening on school time.
Oh, I got that. Well, I got that completely backwards then. Didn't
Yeah,
I?
and we ended up suspending 15 students that were involved.
Wow. But the right thing was done in that case. They went through the investigation and didn't try to cover it up. So that was the point. So read that one. That's a good one. Lana's task 4, the competencies, best I've ever seen. She wrote about, how everything, I mean, her understanding of what we did in the OMA is just flawless. She wrote it right down the line. The best set of competencies I've ever seen written. So if you want to, I mean, you could read those and learn about as much as you've learned from me, or more than you've learned from me this semester. But read her OMA task 4, her competencies. It's wonderful. It will clarify, and it kind of puts everything together as to why we did what we did in the OMA. It's wonderful. One of my favorite things I've read in a long time. Shout out to Jackie for her change management competency that she wrote, and she caught the essence of master scheduling in that it's not about the finished product, folks. It's about transparency and inclusion along the way. It's about the process. Again, we focus too much on what the schedule is. We need to focus on how we developed it, the process of putting it together. That's where that change management's got to come in. So I thought that was a very good one. I read some good stuff from Christina this week. I read some good stuff from Kelly this week, from Sandra. Shout out to Kim and everybody else who's already finished their OMA. I'll call Kim out. Remember, if we're making 3s or better, we're golden. We're moving on. It's a cost benefit analysis, folks. Let's say it takes 10 hours to get to a 3. Well, we can't say, another hour will get us to the 4. No, it may take 40 more hours to get us to the 4. And so as long as you got the stuff that you need, I only tell you if you're missing something. As long as you got the stuff that you need and we're making 3s, 3 5s, 3 7.5s, 4s, we're golden, because we're doing so much more in terms of our activities this semester, coming and going to and froing, talking with people, getting out there. And we're doing so much more with these case studies. I mean, you can see tonight, I know that you don't like having to sit here for 2 hours. I get that. I could stay here all night. I'd rather do this and eat. Look at me. That's saying a lot. But you learn so much from this kind of stuff. Yes, the evidence work is important. We learn a lot from it. But it's just one of 3 really important things this semester: our evidence work, our activities, and our case studies. And so I said that to say we're doing so good. Y'all are doing so good. It's almost like you got a real teacher. I'm just more pleased. Y'all are better students than I am teachers. Let's just put it that way. And I'm very pleased with your work. There's no but coming at the end. There's none of that. Without qualification, you're doing a great job. We enjoy working with you and the work that you're doing. I'm telling you, next week will be wonderful. You'll get a week off from having to hear me rant and beat my fist. And Dr. Sane is truly an expert in the field, and he'll do a great job. Sarah's got a question to close us out.
Are we supposed to load our competencies into Tastring?
No, you simply, load your evidence. We'll talk about doing, we won't talk about doing artifacts, competency artifacts, until we get near the end of the skip.
Okay.
Because I don't want you going in, I don't want you going in 7 or 8 times. That's just such a waste of time. We're going to learn how to go in and do it one time and just sit and be done with that kind of thing. Again, we're all about time management, operations, how we can be efficient and get everything that we need to be done. It's not efficient to go in 7 or 8 times to your competency folio. If you got that kind of time, knock yourself out. But we're trying to do efficiency. So that's a great question, Sarah. It's not that I'm holding things back from you, but when we need to do it, we're going to do it, because principals have to learn that you know, we could all do better if we had more time. And we have to be efficient in the time that we have. And we can't plow the same ground more than once. We just don't have the time to do that. Kids deserve and teachers deserve better than that for us to always have to be in the office with our door locked because we're behind on something. We got to be better than that. We're not going to survive as an institution with leaders who still do that kind of idiots. We just won't. All right. So next week, Exceptional Children's Program, Exceptional Learners. I'm so excited. I wish it was tomorrow. I will see you all next Wednesday. Everybody have a good week. Thank you.